Hello, everybody, and welcome to Firebase After Hours number 21. Today, we are going all in on something that is hot at the moment, and we've got an amazing guest for that. But before we bring on the guests, and before I bring in my favorite co-host, you know the spiel. This is a live stream. It's going live on the internet, and let's be nice to each other. Let's be excellent to each other. We've got a live chat going, so you can use the live chat if you are a subscriber to the channel to send us messages. We will read those messages, and if there are questions that are related to our conversation, we will bring them on and ask them to our guest, or we'll try to answer them ourselves. If you've got questions for any other topic that we're not discussing today, we might answer it, but probably not. So there might be other venues where you can ask those questions. So, and with that out of the way, let me bring in my fellow co-host, and here he is, Noe. Hey, man, how's it going?
Hey, it's going pretty well. Here's the thing is, you keep saying you start with favorite co-host, and then you change to fellow co-host right there at the end. Is it because you remember that you have a live stream coming up with Marina? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I do. Well, yeah. You're
It's
both
okay.
my favorites. You're both my favorite colleagues.
Right. Yeah, sure. It's been a while since we've done a stream, right? It was like December.
Yeah. It has been.
Did you have a good break?
Yeah, me too. Yeah. How about you? Yeah,
it was pretty good. We traveled a bit. It rained like an ungodly amount here, right? It just rained for like the entire time. I went to Southern California where it's supposed to be sunny, and I never saw the sun while I was there, which is a little odd.
So we had snow, but not for Christmas, but later on, and it was quite amazing. So I think probably that much of snow, which is, for Hamburg, it's a lot, right? And it was, people started building snowmen, and it was quite amazing for a couple of days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's still very cold, but no snow.
So for this year's, not for this year, because this seems like we're going to have Jack on for the entire year, but for this episode's live stream, I thought we should call Jack up to help me with my skill issues using Gemini CLI. So I heard skills, Gemini, and CLI, and Jack's name came up in the internal directory search. I was like, we should bring this guy on.
Okay, let's bring him on. Here he is.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, folks.
Yeah, always. So coincidentally, we now report to the same manager, right? So it's all those reorgs that sometimes happen. They lead to interesting guests on the show.
Yeah, they brought us closer together, and excited we could do this and hopefully help out everyone's skill issues. And
you just say mine. It's
fine. So maybe before we dive into skills, let's do a short icebreaker. So let's go around the room and see what each one's favorite dessert is. I'll go first. My favorite dessert is creme brulee, and I got myself a really nice blowtorch so I can make it at home. Jack, how about you?
I was almost going to say creme brulee, but I'll change it up on the fly. A while back, I traveled to Italy, and we had like a homemade tiramisu making class. And nice. I have to say, ever since then, I would have to say that's my new favorite dessert.
Amazing.
For me, it's cheesecake.
Ooh.
The same thing a mouse gets for its birthday, a cheesecake.
Did you do a class as well? A cheesecake making class?
No. My mom just like makes it all the time. And when I say all the time, it's like once a year for my birthday because she knows it's my favorite. That and like Russian tea cakes. If it's cookie season, like Christmas cookie season, it's Russian tea cakes. Like nice. It's like this dough that's really dry, and you like roll it in confectioner sugar, and then you pop it in your mouth, and it's just like it dries out your entire mouth. And for me, I think that's like the best thing. Like people really like, fresh, chewy candy and like really moist desserts. And for me, I just like very dry desserts and very stale candy. I don't think I had fresh candy until I was an adult. Like the first thing you do when you get the candy home is you open up the box and you just let it sit there for like a month, and then it's stale and it's great.
Let's talk about skills. So maybe we can start with, what are skills anyways?
Yeah, for sure. So I know in the title it said Gemini Skills, but really we're talking here about agent skills. Gemini CLI now supports agent skills, which is a standard that kind of was first brought to be by Anthropic. And then it kind of has slowly been adopted by kind of the industry, really, to help solve a context problem. So we have lots more agents and lots more context windows. Everyone's kind of talked about in 2025, the topic of context engineering. And skills are kind of a new player on the field to help try to make your context more lean and not have that context bloat. And they do that in a way that I'll show here in a second, but it's very similar to kind of how MCP and tools work, where the agent only sees the name of the MCP tool and the description, and then it figures out, when to call that tool. And it's very similar. So instead of just dumping everything into context and having that context bloat, skills work very similar. So they have essentially the agent just sees the name of the skill and the description of the skill, so that instead of loading it into your context and having it on every single request, which costs you money and adds up to different tokens being used, it does the same thing as MCP, where it actually is the term progressive disclosure, where as you kind of do those trigger words, like maybe we'll see in an example here that I have a docs writer skill for helping me write READMEs for all my projects or docs. So as soon as I say, can you help me write a README? It's going to go ahead and activate that skill and loading in the context that comes with that skill to kind of allow the agent, or Gemini CLI in this case, to kind of put on like a little persona hat and say, okay, now I'm in docs writing mode. Let me load in like references and other assets to help me do that. So maybe if either of you have any questions, I can clarify.
So skills are kind of like a replacement for like an agents.md file or a Gemini.md file. Is that the right understanding?
Yes, exactly. Not a direct replacement, because agents.md or Gemini.md still have their kind of place where things that you want the agent to know at every kind of request. So like maybe a quick layout of your project structure, or where certain files are, different engineering design patterns that you want in your repository. Those are still really good for putting in a Gemini.md. It's more of the things that you want to load on demand, such as like docs writing. You don't want that to be in the context every single thing as you're doing engineering work or adding features to your app. You want that to be kind of selectively turned on. And that's where this progressive disclosure and skills come into play, so that you can essentially at your user level, you could have skills, for a ton of things, and they're not like, wasting 10% of your context window when you boot up. It loads it in progressively, which is kind of the magic behind the skills.
Peter, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so so to me, it sounds like there are two main aspects that they solve. So one of them is not waste any precious tokens, so to make it cheaper and faster. And then the other thing is to not confuse the model if I've got like a very big agents.md file or Gemini.md file that contains everything that I might care about, right? So let's say that I'm targeting Android, for example, and I would try to put all of the Android documentation, everything that has been written about it, including Rado Meyer's Introduction to Android book, in the context window. And then the context window would be used up already. And then the model wouldn't know, oh, what's this really about? Is that also a good?
Exactly, and we'll show almost an example to the T later on in this, where we have all the Firebase rules, links to all of the documentation, like just dumped into our Gemini.md, which can confuse the agent as we go. So we're gonna kind of break that down and actually turn it into multiple kind of different skills, so that again, when those certain trigger words like, hey, can we test our Firebase rules? That's going to do our Firebase tester skill. If we want to write new rules, again, we kind of want different pieces of context to be loaded progressively instead of just dumping everything in there and having it kind of not needed on standby.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was going to say pre-skills, I think my big thing was I would put all the documentation I wanted into Notebook LM and then tell Notebook LM to write me an agents.md file. And then I would use that agents.md file as a Gemini.md file in my own Gemini extension of like Noe skill issues or whatever. And then I would load that for every project, and it would have all this stuff that I liked or like needed help with that I didn't know off the top of my head. So this is like previously what I would go to the docs and search for. I just had a Gemini.md file, and then it would load on every project. So I probably could have saved myself a lot of tokens. And yeah, so this sounds like it's a much better fit for my wallet overall. Is that the...
Yeah, it's exactly.
Okay.
And it's perfect because you can have skills that you might use that at some point that aren't wasting tokens, right? You're just having that name and description that you might want to do every few days, but you can have them at the ready so that if you just type one of those trigger words or something like that, it will load in, and then you're not having to have it in that Gemini.md file every single time for days without wasting tokens. It's kind of, you can actually share them across teams. We'll get into that as well. Like you can install them very easily. But yeah, let me know if we want to jump into an example. We can.
Yeah, let's take a look at an
please.
example.
Okay, perfect.
So while you load up the example, this sounds like it helps not only with cost, but maybe accuracy as well. Because I find when I have a giant file of context and I pass it in, sometimes the context gets a little garbled if I'm talking about like 4 different things, right? I'm like, oh, write rules this way, deploy functions this way, set up Terraform this way, right? So maybe it helps with clarity as well in your outputs. Would that be a good assessment as well?
Yeah, exactly. It helps kind of keep the model and the agent kind of focused at the task at hand versus kind of giving it everything and confusing it, because you might have 3 or 4 different things in your Gemini.md file that kind of are nuanced that may be at play here, but then maybe not. So they could potentially even contradict each other. Whereas like when you're focused on one specific skill, you can actually have very kind of focused clarity for the agent on, we're doing this specific task, we're taking on this persona, let's go ahead and execute.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so first thing I will mention is skills are currently experimental. They'll be getting turned on by default next week. So folks who are watching this currently are kind of still in the early phases of skills, so you're getting a sneak peek at some things. I am running on the preview version of Gemini CLI because there's some really good stuff in there that we're going to showcase today. So this is first, if you want to enable skills, you just go into settings and type in skills. And then there's going to be this enable agent skills, which is now set to true on the preview build. But in stable next week, this will be on by default. So if you are wanting to get ahead of the curve and try out Gemini skills, you'll want to enable it this week in your settings. And then, so yeah, we'll take a look. There are commands in Gemini CLI for skills. So we have /skills, and this will go ahead and list any skills that are currently configured. So kind of the example I was talking about, where you can see the title of the skill, which is docs writer, as well as the kind of description that we give. But let's actually hop over to our IDE and actually take a look at our skills. So Gemini CLI loads skills from either the project level or the kind of user level. So project level, we're in this kind of StreamPulse, which is the app I'll show today. And so we have our folder, it's .gemini/skills, and then you create a folder for the skill that you want. So we have docs writer here. And this is where you can go ahead and put the different assets. The key file is the skill.md. So this is where if you want to clear out those skill issues, you'll start with a skill.md. And this is how you actually go ahead and configure it. It's kind of, this is markdown front matter, which has started to become more popular with agents and giving them access to files as kind of a templating guideline. So the structure here is you have in the front matter, which is between the brackets or the hyphens, the name of the skill, so docs writer, and then this description. And again, this is kind of what's passed to the agent. So you do want to be kind of somewhat concise, but also give enough detail so that there are those words in there that, like, such as we have especially readme, so that whenever I say, can you help me write readme, it's going to explicitly know to activate this skill. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or anything you think I should clarify here. I'll get more in detail though.
So the question that I have is, it has a name and the description. Are these passed as like a tool to Gemini, or are they exposed on some other mechanism?
Yeah, so the Gemini CLI, and it's kind of similar to all the different kind of CLIs or agents, it has a tool called Activate Skill. And that's kind of how it reads in the name and the description, and then uses its Activate Skill as a tool to load in the additional context. So again, everything in here in this markdown is not loaded until this skill is activated, until that tool call to activate skill is initialized.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
So going to the LLM, there's a tool called Activate Skill, and then it has like an enum of all the different skills that are available, and then it can load those in based upon like a key value pair.
Yeah, exactly. It's essentially just got the name and the description, and it uses exactly how kind of MCP and tools are called. Instead, we're calling the Activate Skill to load in the rest and then continue onwards.
Okay, cool. Nice.
Yeah. And then I'll point out quickly too, the nice thing about skills is that inside inside of our docs writer, you can have additional things, not just markdown files. So you can actually have a scripts folder. I don't have one here, but you could have scripts that actually the skill kind of invokes. So if you wanted to have bash scripts or things like that, that maybe lint or add certain things to your formatting, you could have those. And then in references here, I just have kind of a style guide for kind of Google style documentation. And it is actually, mentioned in the skill, in the main context, to load this style guide as a reference as well. So it's not just one file being loaded. You can have scripts, assets, and references.
Could you actually send me this skill after this live stream? Because I noticed something in there. I always had Peter review my docs or like my scripts before I like do a presentation or anything. And I'm surprised that Peter still wants to work with me, because the amount of times he's gone through and has been like, use active voice, be friendlier, address the user as you, is like, I see that right now at the top of your core mandates, right? And that's like,
I know,
literally
I can never
my
understand
biggest
passive
problem.
voice versus active voice. The tech writers are always against me as well whenever I make changes to docs.
Yeah. So
I think my benefit is that I'm not a native speaker, so they drill it into us a lot more than for any native speaker, I guess.
Well, yeah, like you learned English with a purpose, whereas me, it was more implicit, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly point out, like, the stuff that you want in your Gemini.md and the context file is kind of, still the architecture of your project, how to run and build it, those kind of things that are kind of you'll want at the ready during any request to the agent in Gemini CLI. And then really the skills are just kind of what you might use here and there, but you don't want to have wasting context if you're not going to need them.
Do you list the skills in the Gemini.md file, or do you just expect that the agent will automatically discover them?
Yeah, you don't have to list them. It's discoverable by the agent, and it knows the difference between, again, project level ones that you just want for this specific project, or user level, which are across all your projects. So like this docs writer one, I could probably, right now I have it at the project level. It might make more sense for me to actually move that to the my user .gemini file at the user level, because I could use this across all my projects.
What happens if you install the same skill in multiple layers, and then it gets out of sync, for example, or maybe there is a name clash? But let's talk about getting out of sync first, right? So at one point you decide, oh, this is really good, I want to install it on a global level. So you put it into your home directory, and then you use it in, you have it in one of your projects, and you've entirely forgotten that you've installed it on a global level, and then you make a change to it, and now the one in your user project is more up to date. Which one has higher priority?
Yeah, great question. So you'll get a warning here if you go to /skills that you actually have a user and project level skill. It has the exact same name. And then it will default to your project level skill. So it will assume that the project level one that you have in the project that you're currently in is either fine-tuned or more specific for the project. So similar to how we have, I believe, the same for like hooks and things. If there's name clashes, or we normally defer to the project level one, assuming that it's more targeted or more specific for the project.
Yeah, that's great. So if you never go into the skills/command, but you just boot up Gemini and then just type away, will it automatically discover the skills that are there, or do you need to load them? And if they are automatically loaded and there is a conflict, will it still tell you?
Yeah, so it will on startup, when you install the skill, it will tell you that there's conflict. It won't show you here, but it will show you in /skills. And you can always see it in the kind of this header line here, how many skills are currently active. So I don't have to run /skills to invoke a skill. Like if I just write, can you help me write a README for our StreamPulse application? It should, fingers crossed, find that skill and see the activate skill tool start to be called.
Will it tell you that? Oh, look at that. It tells you activate skill. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of the dialogue, which is that progressive disclosure, where as those kind of words that trigger in the description of the skill, it will prompt you if you want to go ahead and allow this skill to be used once for this session and so on. And then it kind of gives you this little snapshot of what you're getting. So you're always going to see the skill.md, and then you can also see that our skill, like we mentioned, has a reference README in our assets. So it's going to kind of has a gold standard of what I would consider kind of at least the headings in the README that I want, as well as that style guide that we talked about.
Sorry if you already answered this. What's the difference between the assets folder and the references folder?
Oh, good question. So there's not really a huge difference. References is kind of just telling the model where to look, and assets, same thing. So there's assets, references, and here I can actually show you the difference if you would like.
Yeah.
So we have agent skills in the Gemini CLI docs. If you there's quick starts, there's also kind of all the different commands, because there are quite a few. Like you can enable and disable skills on the fly. So if you wanted to not have a skill for a certain session, you can disable it, and that will actually remove the name and the description from the agent from seeing it, which again kind of saves you that context. So if you did want to like really get token efficient, you could kind of, in a certain session you're not going to be using any of these skills, you can actually disable them. Again, it's kind of, I wouldn't normally do that unless you're like really token crunching. But you can also, here I didn't mention this, you can also there's a Gemini Skills install command that you can just point actually at a GitHub repository or a local file, and it will load that skill in as well. So
that's nice.
Yeah, if I created a skill, put it on GitHub, and started someone else wanted to try it out or download it, it's easy to do.
When you install it from GitHub, does it always install from head, and then will it automatically update on the next time you launch Gemini CLI?
I believe it just loads it in the current head from the current state. There is a skill, so I think you would have to. I have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure you'd have to. It's just basically loading. It's just loading it. It's not like setting up any. I don't think any like updates. I think, but
okay,
that's a great idea. If we don't do that, I like that.
So it snapshots it. It snapshots it and downloads like the files.
Exactly. Then, it basically just copies over the skill.md and any of the files it needs.
And then it won't update if I like push out something.
No, I don't believe so, but
okay,
I'd have to double check on that. So here's the difference between references. These are kind of static documentation and examples. And it looks like assets could also be kind of binaries that you run as well. So I guess there's probably a bit of overlap there, but. Yeah.
So did you already start the agent? Sorry, the skill? No, we're
Nope.
still waiting
We
for
can go ahead and
approval, right?
allow it. We've been
Okay,
waiting.
yeah. I'm curious what it does.
So you'll see our context just went down. So that you get in the bottom right here, you can see what context is left.
Okay. Yeah.
And now it's going to go ahead and actually read that reference README, as well as so that those files that it didn't read before. Our skill.md says to go ahead and read it, and it's just going to go ahead and start to get a little bit of an understanding before it writes that README. But you can see when we activated the skill that our context went down from 100 to 98, I believe.
You know what would be fun? If there was like a little animation where, you know, there's confetti sprinkling out of that percentage.
we have a little, something not quite confetti, but for hooks, when hooks get activated, we have a little kind of a hook and a little disclaimer that comes up saying like this hook is running.
Nice.
And then
Okay,
just another
cool.
thing I'll
And here's
point
the
out
result.
Here. Yeah, so this is we can press Control S to kind of shrink down or preview our README. But I was just going to point out actually here, this is a new thing also kind of launching this week, is if you see up here, we actually just updated Gemini CLI to when it actually is aware in the terminal bar of its state. So it will say like working away when Gemini is thinking. And actually now, because it needs our input, you can see it has this little hand emoji. Might be a little small, but you can see it says action required. So if you have multiple Gemini CLIs running, it's kind of nice to know which one's needing your attention at any given time, which is a new little thing.
Very cool.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and allow this, and then we'll maybe switch back over to our IDE just to view it nicely.
It's like one of those nice, delightful things, right? That when you see like status bars and like the terminal update like that, like I never knew how to update the status bar in the terminal. But it's also like when you visit a website and it's like a big giant corporate entity, and they still have like the little Next logo as the favicon, or like the Astro logo as the favicon.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, I don't know, you know.
You're lucky I changed mine from the default Vite in our application today. So you'll see it's basically just telling it to how to putting in a template in place for the README, giving a quick kind of overview of the application, some of the features and prerequisites for which kind of node version you need. Yeah.
So this StreamPulse application, did you build this yesterday?
Yes, with the help of Gemini CLI. If people,
nice.
I know we have polls and stuff, but if you want to head over to StreamPulse, stream-pulse-live.web app, you can actually vote live or send emojis that other people can see.
Stream-pulse-live.web.app. And then hopefully I will post that to the chat.
And yeah, you can answer if you are familiar with skills ahead of time. This is essentially just a little fun application I made for the stream, being able to we have someone wondering what skills are.
Nice.
Oh, this is neat.
This is so nice.
I had to add the crab. I don't know about if other people are aware of the crab, but at Google, in our Google Meets, people always spam crab emojis for some reason across the screen while people are talking.
Yeah, but ours walks across.
Yeah, so then I made this little application. You can see people can vote a lot of times, so I'll probably have to change it so people can only vote once. Maybe we'll add that
feature. It's a vote fight.
Yeah, but the thing here is it's just saved into our Firebase database. So
yeah, nice.
While we run streams like this, we can actually have our polls and reactions being counted, so that if my manager asks me, hey, how many people were participating in your stream 2 months ago? We can actually go check the data out.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what happens if can you go back to the console and then change the color of one of the bars? Does it automatically update on the web?
That's a good question. Maybe. Let's see which one we're on. I don't know which one we're in live. Probably one of them. It probably can. I guess this is the one that's live. I don't know. What's a good color?
Let's try red.
Is this showing that it's updating live by it being spammed?
No, it's not updating. I don't know. Maybe you have to reload. Nope. Maybe it was the wrong one.
Oh, the whole color disappeared.
We broke it. We broke it.
Are you using Tailwind? Because I think doesn't Tailwind compile the colors into the CSS file, so like it sends a really compact CSS file?
Yeah, it flattens it a little bit.
Yeah, so maybe that's what happened.
So we'll never know. At least we still have the numbers here.
All right,
yeah, but
cool.
That's kind of the application.
That's nice. So we spoke about rules and Firestore rules specifically. So does this application have rules already, or can everybody basically just hack their way into it?
Yeah, so it has very basic rules, which are very basic. Which basically says people can create reactions, anyone can read, and I believe it just there's an admin, so only the admin can create new polls.
That is not an accurate rule, by the way. If request.auth does not equal null, that just means if anybody's logged in.
So we'll see if our skill can catch that.
Ooh.
Yeah. Do we have a skills a skill yet for that?
No, we don't. And here, I just wanted to show it. So we have a bunch of. One of us on stream created these. Not myself. I copied it from someone else here. Where we have a bunch of Firebase kind of even calls them skill sets. So this is what we were talking about when you used to dump things into a Gemini.md file, have different kind of little pieces. But these are kind of what is a great example for how we can take this out of our Gemini.md file, reduce that context bloat, and have it be a candidate for skills. So I have a prompt here as well, where essentially I'll copy it into Gemini CLI, but it's essentially asking us to create 3 different skills. So Firebase Rules Helper, Rules Writer, and then Rules Tester. So one of them will just be helping to troubleshoot rules. If we run into kind of permissions or errors, the helper skill will kind of be activated, as well as the Rules Writer. So this will actually help us create new rules and write rules. And then the tester, which will help hopefully kind of set up the emulator and get us started. And you can see I've kind of just dumped all of the different Firebase documentation to it and told it that inside of our Gemini.md file, we have a bunch of stuff that we want to kind of take out and turn into skills. And
did you write that file manually?
I actually used Gemini CLI to help me first. I gave it kind of the Firebase main docs page and then asked it to kind of make the tree of the different files related to rules.
Okay.
That's kind of like, I wrote a blog article about this recently, like looping agents, right? This is just like it's not an automated looping agent, but it's like a Jack automated looping agent, right? So you send it a prompt and then you're like, ask me about my documentation that I should be adding for you to use as like a source. And then it's like, oh, what are all the docs you want to use? And then you send it all the docs and then you like iterate with it to get to a good prompt that you can then use consistently, right?
Exactly. That's kind of how I tackle things. Instead of just doing like a vague prompt, I'll actually start with, can you help me, write a detailed prompt for X, and then kind of go through.
Yeah, so just like how I frustrate Peter, I get concerned that I frustrate Gemini with my poor prompting. Peter's like, is this even English that you've written? And I'm like, I thought it was.
Well, but here's the thing. I think Gemini never get frustrated, right? It's always like, here's your answer. And it always has a follow-up question for you.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and
even if you use Gemini in the Firebase console, if you use Gemini in the Firebase console and you say something like, oh, how can I create a new database? It will tell you. And then it's like, do you want to know blah, blah, blah related thing about this as well?
Or it'll ask you, like, which database are you referring to? Data Connect? Firestore? Real-time database?
Well, I was specific about it, right? So I said,
Oh, okay.
help me with my Firestore.
Oh, see, when
Yeah.
I prompt it in the console, I say how create database, and that's it. Like
Very
I
detailed.
I go very caveman when I talk to Gemini, how create database.
Yeah, I'll send you a sticker for your enter key so you can, and it says,
Jack, is this repo for the StreamPulse? Is that available publicly?
I can make it available publicly afterwards. Yeah, it was just something I spun
Okay.
up.
Yeah, so we'll post that in the comments later, or you'll post it in the comments later.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. So I just did /clear just as like a general best practice. Like our first kind of prompts were related to the README, right? So we're kind of initiating a new task here where we're wanting to create new skills. So I normally just do /clear to kind of clear the conversation, get back to 100% context, and have a fresh slate. And then you also saw there that I did /model to actually change to Gemini 3 Flash. Like for things, most of the time, I'll just use Gemini 3 Flash. It's easily just as capable as Gemini 3 Pro and much faster. So like for a lot of things like this, I'll use Gemini 3 Flash as my daily kind of driver.
Good.
I need a cheat sheet of all these printed like next to my monitor because you are just like spouting off all this useful information.
No worries. You can do /help. It is a little bit of a wall of text to read through, but you can get all the commands in one place.
What does /memory do?
Oh, so /memory is actually where you can kind of show your context and where it's coming from. So if we do, I believe, memory show, it will essentially, because you can have multiple context files, right? So I could have one at my user level, one at my project level. So you can see that actually it's just going to show you everything that's getting loaded into context as soon as you start. So this matches up, essentially just showing us what we have in our Gemini.md file. But if you had multiple files, you could show it all in one place. And you can actually do /memory list to kind of see the different files and where they're coming from, where all that context is being loaded from.
We should probably just make time for you and me to talk, and I'll just ask you about all the / commands.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, let's go ahead and paste in our detailed prompt. And one of the things is why I'm showing currently the preview release that we'll be getting into, like will be released into the kind of stable version next week, is that we actually have a built-in skill for Gemini CLI to help you create skills. So you'll see that it was kind of hidden. You didn't see it, but hopefully because I've asked it to create skills, it will actually activate this skill creator. That is kind of like a hidden built-in skill that as soon as you ask Gemini CLI to go ahead and create skills, it will trigger this to actually help you automate kind of the process and prompt you to find out what you're trying to build and help you build that skill.
And that's in the preview version right now?
Yeah, it'll be in stable next week on Tuesday.
Okay, cool. Do you always ship on Tuesday?
Yes, every Tuesday. The preview, like what's in main branch of our repository gets pushed to preview, and the preview gets promoted to stable.
Nice.
So I see this is running web fetch for like a lot of things. And if I had a skill that said, go to this URL to get the latest documentation, would it go to that URL every time? Or would it just be like, oh, to get the latest documentation, you can go to this URL, just as an FYI?
No, it would actually go ahead and do the web fetch. If you're like wanting to see the actual names of the tools, you can do /tools. It's always helpful to actually, like, if you want to be extremely accurate, like say call the web fetch tool versus just saying read the docs.
Okay.
That kind of level of expertise.
If I had a Gemini.md file that was like just a list of URLs, it would go and fetch that when it loaded the Gemini.md file, or would it wait until I requested something and then load it?
It would normally, for that, it would do it when you request it. It would say like, oh, in the Gemini.md, if you're saying update the documentation or like read them, the most recent documentation, it will know that from the Gemini.md and do the web fetch. Then it won't preemptively like web fetch, because there could be a lot there.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and do those web fetch. It's gonna take a few seconds here to go, and there's a lot of URLs in that in that prompt. But
Yeah, there's quite a lot of rules docs in the Firestore docs, right? There's you can even go down to like the value types that you expect, right? So I didn't know that you could validate like user input as well in rules, so you could check whether or not it's like an integer or a string or
I
a
remember
timestamp or things like that.
the Gemini.markdown that you created has all of these.
Yeah, and
All
it's
the
one of those
different
things.
types.
And also testing. So if you wanted to write tests for rules, I didn't know that was a thing until I started looking into like, oh, what are all the docs that we have on rules? And there's a video by, I think, Todd and Rachel Myers about doing unit tests for rules, which is like quite a valuable watch.
Awesome. So yeah. Now you'll see it's kind of done all those web fetches, kind of summarized all of the Firebase information from the site. And now it's kind of going along with our 3 skills that we kind of outlined. And these kind of, it's going to execute some node scripts that are basically using the built-in the skill creator in Gemini CLI to go ahead and kind of have these, it'll first generate templates and then go and replace the templates with the content for our specific skills. So it'll just kind of go through the flow of, but if you were extremely vague here, it would actually prompt you to go ahead and kind of provide guidance. I was testing it out yesterday, being like, just asking generic Firebase skill, and it started asking me, are you talking about auth, hosting? Like, you can get pretty specific with skills, which is nice. It won't just create like a generic one. It somewhat knows that skills are meant to be a bit more targeted.
You did a Noe prompt. Firebase skill.
Yeah, I mean, but that's an interesting aspect. So it sounds like you should have specific skills instead of like the one world skill that knows everything about your target domain. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's loading it when it needs it. You can definitely be more specific. Like, it doesn't need to be generic, because it is going to be kind of for that one prompt where that skill is activated. It can be very targeted.
And let's say we wanted to create skills for Firebase. And so Firebase has 20+ products, and we want to provide them for developers. Should we create, well, obviously, we should create skills for each of the products at least, or maybe even more specific. But then the question is, can we ship this as one package? And is there a way how you can group skills into an umbrella skill of sorts?
Yeah, so skills are nice because they are kind of a standard now. So you can create a skill, and if you create a skill for Gemini CLI, you can also load it into Antigravity or a different provider, because it is a standard. Like, the skills are kind of create once and share anywhere. And you can actually, I believe, kind of progress down from a folder. So inside the skills folder, it will then kind of progress down and look for those skill.md files.
Nice.
So I believe you could have a Firebase folder in skills that then has multiple skills within it.
Yeah, because I seem to recall that when I was looking around for skills, there were some skills published somewhere, and that there are like a gazillion of websites that now aggregate skills and publish them. And I seem to recall that I saw at least a couple of skills that were groups of skills that were nested. And I was just curious if that is an official kind of standard, or if that is just like, it just so happens. But it sounds like it is intentional.
I believe so, yeah. I'd have to double check on that, but I believe they can be nested skills. And skills are actually kind of becoming much more popular. I think it was Vercel or just released like a ton of skills for how to do kind of applications, writing applications. as well as there's even NPX package now, like NPX Skills, to actually distribute and install skills as well. So you can just like NPX them and grab skills from their kind of registry.
Yeah, nice.
So now it's going to go ahead and actually, you're seeing that Gemini CLI is actually running a kind of, it's actually running another Gemini CLI command interactively. So you can kind of see, this is one thing that Gemini CLI has that I don't believe others have, where it's interactive shells. So it's running a shell command that actually needs my input right now. You can see it's waiting.
Yeah, how do you get there?
So you can tab to focus. So if I tab, you can see now it says focus. So now I'm in this shell. If I shift tab to get out. And tab
it even says so in the top right corner of the box.
So now I can go ahead and interact with this specific interactive shell and go ahead and install these by running Gemini CLI commands.
And so now, so it launches a second Gemini command to install those. And then once you're back in the command that you're in, will it automatically update, or will you have to say skills reload?
Yes, exactly. So
it
doesn't automatically have any like file watchers. You need to do /skills reload.
Yeah.
And then you can see now in our header, it went from 1 to 4, and we have 3 new available skills. So now if we run,
if you do skills list, can we see like what it assigned each skill description since Gemini generated the skill?
Yep. Again, there's probably some refinement to do here as you run wild with having Gemini generate its own skills. You'll probably want to inject your own expertise as well. Because some of these you can see, like my first thing I see is that like some of these are, the descriptions are somewhat similar, right? Like they all say Firebase security rules. So you might want to try to get more specific in these descriptions to help it know which skill to activate, as hopefully it does the right job. But like when you have overlap in the descriptions is where kind of like similar to MCP tools, where you want to kind of have those certain specific triggers for each skill so that Gemini CLI knows which one to do and not just kind of like trial and error between the skills. So there's probably some refinement we could go in and tweak these descriptions, because I would say those are kind of the most important piece for when to know how to activate the skill from Gemini CLI. And if we go back to if we go into our .Gemini Skills folder, you can see it's going to generate these kind of initial folders and then copy it over. So we can probably clean up and delete these now, but that's how it
is that. So the reason why they're still there is that something that you might want to optimize in the skills writing agent. Skills writing skill.
Yeah, exactly. It should might want to. It first like does it in a temporary folder.
Yeah.
And then one of the commands that I was accepted was basically like, does this look good? Would you like me to activate and install the actual skill? And when you do the install, the install command moves it from these folders into the actual like skills folder. So again, we'll probably optimize that in the future, but for now, like it's asking you before it activates, like it's giving you a temporary folder to go check it out and say, do you want me to make any changes to the skill before we give it access?
So we have a question in the live stream. Are there any direct Vertex AI tools that are accessible through skills? And how about multi-agents? Is there like a Google Cloud registry of skills that have been created by Google Cloud and Vertex AI for, hey, here's how you set up GKE and here's how you set up Cloud Run and things like that as skills?
I don't know if there is yet. I think you'll like slowly start seeing that a lot more. Like that is like what Vercel did, where they basically released all of their kind of internal knowledge as skills for building applications. I think you'll see a lot more providers, especially like Google Cloud, start to have skills for doing specific tasks or for specific products. Like there's no reason for us not to, refine these Firebase skills and publish them for others to easily install. I think you'll see a lot of people move towards that model, especially since they're standardized and like any agent can use them.
Yeah. Okay. And then also someone says the Firebase rules helper is clutch. I'm running into a permissions issue for my collections, and this saves time toggling between the GUI. Can't wait to use this.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, you can see we already created these skills, and now if we were like to go and ask, write new rules, it should activate them. Again, I'm not necessarily the Firebase expert, so I have no idea how accurate these skills are in the one shot.
They look pretty good.
Can't we just say, try this out and let me see how it looks like?
Yep. Let's do that. Here, I will let me exit this and show you one more thing, because you can actually do Gemini -- resume. This is a new command that not super new, but if you exit a session and do Gemini -- resume, you can actually load back into previous sessions.
Why didn't I know about this last week? I accidentally exited out of a session, and then I was like, oh man, that context would have been useful for the next question I had.
Yeah, you can also do it through inside interactively through /resume. So you can actually now scroll through, or do /search, so I can see find the conversations where I was talking about skills.
Oh, that is so cool. And if you navigate into one of those conversations, does it show you the conversation, or does it just load it and you're back in the spot where you left off?
Yeah, it will just go back and go back to where you are.
Yeah. I'm going to create a Gemini CLI skill that creates a meeting, like a calendar invite for us, and just pops it. Anytime I open up the Gemini CLI, it's just go ask you for a new Gemini CLI tip. This is great.
I have a question about one thing that really bothers me. So I have the impression that let's say you're in that input box where you are right now, and then you type something. So for example, you want to say, I want you to refine this text here. I want you to refine this message I'm going to send to Noe. And then you want to add a line break and then paste your thing. So how do you insert the line break? I always try, I think it's Shift-Enter, but that doesn't seem to work all of the time.
Yeah,
and I can't for the life of me remember the word star command.
The default binding is Control-J. However, let me just clear that. It's another special one. If you do Escape, or Control-C, when you have something in the box, it just wipes it. But /terminal setup. So the reason we can't have Shift-Enter is because every terminal known to man
it creates a new terminal, right?
It does it differently, right? So there's the key bindings are. We wish it could just be Shift-Enter from the start, but there's actually a lot of nuance in kind of checking what terminal you're using to handle it differently. So if you run /terminal setup, I think I've already run this, but now I can do Shift-Enter.
Oh, it will auto detect this.
It basically figures out what terminal you're using. I'm using Ghosty, and it knows how to basically add that key binding for the specific terminal.
That is amazing. So, and what is the reason? I never ran terminal setup. So, what is the reason why sometimes it seems to be working and sometimes it doesn't? So I use iTerm.
I have no idea. It depends. Sometimes if you're using people who use Tmux are also. There's so many different nuances when people are using Tmux to run sessions.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah,
I thought
terminal setup /terminal setup.
But this was super useful. Thanks.
Oh, we have a new live stream question. It's actually a feature request. When Gemini CLI is loading, can we have tips about commands shown? And this is from looks like Noe.
Who's this guy?
So yes, we do have tips shown. So if I exit and I think.
Have I just not been reading them? I read the funny messages that show up, like rewriting everything to Rust for no reason.
Yeah,
right?
people.
Like, I
Those
love
are
that.
also our hot topic. Those are very polarizing. The funny messages, like why
I
can't
like them.
developers C# or something like that? And
Yeah,
there's
the
little
C#
jokes.
one gets old a little bit. It's still funny.
And something like, who actually reads these messages?
Yeah.
You know,
But if
Or,
you,
like,
I believe we have it set so like if you can you summarize my README? There should always be a tip in the first message. So it said like
and then it's
/theme to
gone.
change. And then
It's
now
like it's like when you come into your Twitter stream and then you see an interesting message and boom, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. So we do have it so that there are tips dispersed in there with the jokes. Yeah, but they show the first
there
message.
should be a
The
setting
first
for
one is
joke
always
to
a tip.
ratio.
I think it's like 30% tips,
Yeah.
70% jokes.
Oh man.
So yeah, now if we say like, can we help me set up Firebase rules tests? Let's see if our new skills get activated.
Could we see if it could rewrite the rules? Because I didn't like your rules.
Oh yeah, here we can kill that. Let's just start fresh.
I thought I think your rules were too permissive.
Probably. So let's see if it's able to know which of those 3 ones that say Firebase rules is the right one. Okay, so it looks like it is finding the Firebase Rules Writer and activating it. Let's see what it has to say if it tears apart my my Firebase.rules. Oh, it seems like Gemini CLI agrees with you.
Yeah.
There you go.
I would say do all of them. Ensure users can only increment vocabs and not modify the question or options. Ensure reactions data come from a specific structure. Implement stricter checks for the host role beyond just being authenticated. Yes, that's the third one is like the most important. And then the fourth one is probably the next most important.
So yeah, these are the jokes that some people find a little bit, some people like them, some people don't like them. It's quite polarizing.
I also really like how sometimes it'll say like investigating vote integrity. So like, it's like processing something like, and it always seems to be relevant to like what I'm doing at the same time.
So yeah, those basically are the thoughts. So instead of showing the thoughts, there's like a header for thoughts and that's being displayed back to you. So within the jokes and the tips, those are actually Gemini thoughts kind of being, so you can kind of keep tabs on what's happening.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
before you accept this, is there a way to see the whole file? Oh, how'd you do that?
Yeah, so Control S is to show the entire thing.
You just highlighted the tip too. There's things on the screen that I seem to never be able to read. Okay.
So
yeah, that's a lot better for create is host. Oh, and it added a function is host.
Instead of just checking if you're authenticated.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
So yeah, you can go ahead and you can also press, actually, I didn't show it there, but there's an option to also Control X will open the code changes in your preferred editor. So if you like to look in the IDE.
What if my preferred editor is like NeoVim? Will it still launch it like in the Gemini session, or will it open up a new terminal tab?
So if you do /editor, there are like a list. I don't know if NeoVim's on that list or not. So your preferred editor might not. Yeah.
If I seem like I have lost everything that you're saying right now, it's because I'm going to go check. Gemini.
No worries. So it looks like right after we're now doing like our rules tester, now it's activating our other skill to go ahead and test out our new rules. So it looks like
no further action is needed on your part. mean, we still probably need to publish these.
Yeah, exactly. And you can do like shell mode. So if you just type a exclamation mark, you toggle between basically pass through shell mode. So like if I said to Gemini CLI, let's deploy these rules, it will figure it out for me. But again, it's going to kind of like be asking the LLM. It's going to cost some tokens. If there are ever commands that you just know what they are and want to run them yourself, going into shell mode and running them helps save you those tokens. So it's a nice way not to have to like switch tabs or go try something, run something in a different shell. You can just do shell mode.
There is a NeoVim editor.
So I can do like npm run build to build my new changes. And then do I need to do anything special for Firebase, or is it just Firebase deploy? For rules?
I think it's just Firebase deploy.
You can also do hyphen only rules.
It was quite fast.
Yeah, quite fast. Let's see if our site's crashed. You can add new polls and stuff like that. This is my admin panel I added, so not everyone can just start creating polls.
So how do you get there?
It's a little button in the bottom.
Oh.
Does dessert? Is that desert or dessert? It's always my kryptonite.
It's 2 S's because you don't want to eat the desert twice.
Oh.
That's a good one. Let's see who's.
Or you always want seconds of dessert, something like that.
There we go. I'm gonna self-vote for myself.
Oh,
sorry, I just really like cheesecake.
Yeah. I'm getting outvoted a lot here.
You said it's Control X to launch the editor?
Yeah, I think you can also do it too if you like type something. Like say you're writing a really long prompt, you can like write something in here like, this is a long prompt, and if I press Control X. Oh yeah, I think I can now edit my prompt here. Ooh. Continue writing. And I believe I haven't used this in a while. If I just close it, does it update?
Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
So if you're doing something really, that's one I don't think anyone really knows. But yeah, it does helpful if you're like
doing a multi-line thing like Peter's doing.
Yeah. Yep. Instead of just being like.
That's great. That's so good. There's another thing. So Noe, can you bring this comment on? So somebody was asking about integrating Antigravity with Gemini CLI, and I think there is an IDE integration feature that you can use, right?
Well, it looks like VS Code plus Gemini Agent.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the one. Exactly.
So there's like a VS Code extension, right, that integrates with Gemini. So that way you can have Gemini in the terminal. And as you use Gemini CLI in the terminal, it will show the diffs in the editor. Is that the right understanding?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
It's kind of like a little companion app so that if you were to launch Gemini CLI from in here, it will prompt you to install essentially the VS Code extension that works in like any VS Code fork. So Windsurf, Antigravity, etc. And exactly what you said. So if you start Gemini CLI here, it will automatically know what files you have open. So if you say, can you lint my current file, or can you update my current file? You don't have to like at the file. It already knows what you have open, and it will pull that into the context and show the diffs instead of showing it in the CLI. It will say, hey.
That is so good, because I thought that the only thing it does is what Noe said, that if you are in VS Code or in Antigravity or whichever IDE, you go into the built-in terminal, you launch Gemini CLI from in there, you give it a prompt to work on something in your workspace, and it does something to your files. that you will see the diff in the diff editor in the IDE. I always thought that was the only feature, but being able to say, how does my current file look like? I mean, that is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a few little nuances. Yeah, exactly. So there are a few advantages. It's not just the diffs; it's ability to understand what's in the workspace context-wise.
The one thing I wish it would do, or that you would have an option to do, and maybe it's possible, is let's say that you are in the IDE and you're using the sidebar chat to work on your code.
Yeah.
And then you go into the CLI to do something. Then these seem to be separate sessions, right? They still work on the same code base, but the one window doesn't seem to have knowledge of what's happening in the other window. So sometimes I wish you could just choose whichever you like better, because I like to see the thinking behind my prompting. So oftentimes I'll just go into the IDE to see what it's thinking about while it's trying to answer my questions. But other times, I find it more convenient to work in the CLI.
Yeah, I think you'll see, like, with Antigravity especially, the integrations between the two start to grow, such as installing a skill in Gemini CLI and immediately having it available in Antigravity. Right now, they both use somewhat different folder structures. I think you'll see us kind of use the same one. And I would like, ideally, we're kind of in the talks with the Antigravity folks, but like also having, you can plan in Gemini or plan in Antigravity and then open that plan in Gemini CLI. Plan mode's coming soon to Gemini CLI. So ideally vice versa, where you can plan it in one, execute in the other, see the same skills, have the same MCP servers. Have a nicer little streamlined.
Yeah, because now it's a little bit of manual work to keep your setup in sync, right? And that is another question I had. So we've put our skills in the .gemini folder, and I believe for Antigravity, they need to be in the .agent folder. But I found that if I go into Antigravity and say, hello there, and very good morning to you, sir. I happen to have a couple of skills in this workspace. Can you use them? It will then go off, scan the workspace, and then say, of course I can use your skills. And then it will use them, right? So it is, but you have to, you have to really push it to understand this. It doesn't seem to do this automatically.
Yeah, I would say this is like an area that the whole kind of skills industry needs to figure out still. Like between different competitors, you'll have different, like ours is .gemini/skills. Other folks like Antigravity, some I believe they're .agent or .gemini/Antigravity/skills, and the other providers all do it differently. There are some tools out there, like there's a tool called .agents, where essentially everything gets put in a .agents folder, and then it symlinks. It creates these links so that it automatically, like if you did .gemini/skills, it would read from your .agent skills, so that you can kind of have skills in one place, but all your different providers and agents can read them. It's kind of a Band-Aid fix for now. I think you'll see, ideally, the industry standardize
the 16 standard
.agents, hopefully. Yeah, there really is, because you're right. Right now, you have to either kind of tease the model to copy over skills, or just copy a folder and paste it just for the tool's sake, like just for Antigravity's sake. I think you'll see hopefully that standardized, so that .agents or something similar becomes the standard, so that all your different tools can read from the same skills.
I was too busy setting up NeoVim as my editor in the Gemini CLI. Did you actually get the rules tester written? Because I'm actually kind of curious about the results of that.
I don't think it actually ran any tests.
Because I think this is like one of those things that I just never knew it existed. And when I discovered it, I was like, I got to use this all the time now, right? Because you make like small changes, and you want to make sure that you have comprehensive rules that cover not only the golden path, like everybody's using the application correctly, but also the inverse where people are trying to insert the wrong data into a field, and you always want to validate that, right?
Yeah. We've already activated the skill here, so just if anyone's wondering why I didn't activate the skill, it's like you only have to activate the skill once. It's already been loaded in.
So once per session or once per workspace? I mean, what happens if I come back into the workspace tomorrow?
Yeah, if I start a brand new session, it will prompt me to activate the skill again.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah. So it looks like it's going ahead and starting to write a test folder and configure the emulator.
And then do you ever turn on YOLO mode, or do you like to read everything as it goes?
Yeah, so I will do my default mode is accepting edits, which is Shift Tab.
Is that YOLO mode or is that something else?
It's not YOLO mode. So YOLO mode is everything. So YOLO mode is, it has access to run shell commands, call your MCP tools, edit, write files.
Okay.
Accepting edits is kind of like an in-between layer where it can edit and write files, but it can't execute scripts. It can't do other like shell commands or anything like that. It's kind of that. So it doesn't like do anything destructive, but it can write code.
Oh, okay. So you feel like a little bit safer with.
So like exactly. So
accept edits. Yeah.
Accept edits wrote the tests, but it's not going to automatically start running the emulator or spawning anything, right? So.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Let's see if this works or if I have to install anything.
Unable to locate. Oh, you don't have Java installed.
Oh, I'm a Python person.
I mean, you don't C#? Is that why?
Oh, look, it's trying to add a memory to say that you need Java for that.
Darn.
I'll say no for now. I obviously didn't do my homework enough. I was hoping to write the tests live. Yeah.
Well, neat. Let's see. I think there's a few more questions that came in. My goal is to have one agent/model context across multiple IDEs. For example, my stack is Unity Editor plus VS Code. Is Gemini CLI intended for this? I missed the start.
Yeah, so I guess like that's the question. Kind of seems like the new question of like IDE versus CLI. I think they both have a place. Where like for that specific use case, it sounds like CLI is a great cause because at its base. CLIs are at the base, it's in the terminal, right? So it has access to all the tools that you have access to, all the other CLIs that you have access to. So Gemini CLI can run G-Cloud commands if Unity or has an MCP server or has its own CLI. It can just call those, right? So I'm able to call Firebase Gemini CLI. If I asked it to deploy to Firebase, it would also run that Firebase deploy command, right? So having the ability to have access to all of the tools that you already have on your machine is kind of where the CLI comes, like the benefits start to come in, is that if I have the GitHub CLI, I can manage all my pull requests or do those directly in the CLI. So
I've gotten really into using CLIs in the past year because I have a small child, and sometimes my small child can't reach things. So she just grabs a pile of whatever and stacks it up. And sometimes it includes my laptop and very heavy textbooks and cinder blocks or whatever we have laying around the house, right? And she just, somehow my laptop winds up on the bottom, and I'm always worried about the screen breaking and losing all my code because I always remember to get push, except when I'm writing something that's relatively useful to me, right? So I've been spinning up a VM when I travel, so that way I can write code remotely, and then it's kind of stored on like a remote server. And then I've just gotten really into using the CLI. So I've set up like an Ansible playbook that installs everything. And then it doesn't really matter what my front end IDE is, as long as I have like Gemini CLI, the terminal, all this other stuff. I feel like more empowered that way. And like I use Tmux, like it's nobody's business. So
yeah, exactly. I think like, there's lots of stuff in the works for like to make that even easier. So like you can activate Gemini CLI or like send prompts from like Google Chat or from like Slack or things like that. So there are things in the works to like really utilize CLI to kind of start remote sessions from wherever you're connected.
Man, this is, yeah, we should have you more often, or just like a weekly with you. Just brain dump on me.
I promise I'll download Java for the next one.
Perfect. So the next question is, how can you configure your agent to use latest knowledge-based, latest knowledge base? Right now, I notice it's using some old code syntax or old library. Is there a way to restrict that into your agent/AI?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways that you can kind of do that. Like we talked about earlier, if you're pointing CLI at docs that are kept up to date, you can do the web fetch and pull in context that way. We also have hooks that are launching next week, or like, again, are kind of experimental alongside skills, where like hooks can run arbitrary kind of scripts at certain life cycles of Gemini CLI. So before every model request or before a tool call. And that's actually another way that you can kind of do really cool add-ons or built-ins to Gemini CLI, where you can inject certain context at certain life cycle of the kind of the agent's life cycle. So I think twofold. There's like making sure that it has access to that context. Again, the models are cut off, have certain knowledge dates. They're always going to be like slightly behind. There are also tools out there like Context 7 or certain tools that try to do that, keep the knowledge base more up to date than the models themselves.
So on the note of knowledge base, what do you think about, so let's say you provide a library and maybe not something as big as Firebase, but something smaller. And you want to make sure that people can use your library correctly. Would it make sense to put a skill directly in your SDK/library so that when people install that, it would automatically also install the skill with it, and then the skill could contain the correct documentation, right? Because you've installed that version of the SDK, so it can contain that correct version of the documentation already, including all of the things telling the agent, hey, typically you make this mistake all over again, so let's not do this again, but do it properly. Is that something that is feasible?
I think that's a use case that you'll see pop up for sure. Like we saw LLMs.txt like really become a thing, where making sure that large language models are trained on code bases or repositories efficiently were a thing. And now kind of we went to context files, so that like if you're trying to develop, like if you look in the Gemini CLI repo on GitHub, we have a Gemini.md and some skills in there, or some skills and things in there to help with actual development of Gemini CLI. So there's like a PR creator skill, where if you use that skill, it creates the PR in like our format with our template. But I think exactly what you said, having skills where we're now trying to not only just have LLMs, but have like people driving agents or CLIs be able to build on top of technology. I think skills is where you'll see a lot of people go in terms of, hey, install this skill into your CLI, and you're now an ADK expert or Firebase expert.
Yeah, amazing.
I
think we had a couple more questions.
Yeah, I was just about to ask the next one. Did you cover how an agent can ingest your local code base and become aware of context that way?
Yeah, so this is another command that I use a lot. If you want, so like, let's say StreamPulse was integrating a new library and we wanted to have it in our context, or have access, not necessarily in the context, but be able to start reading all different files, because by default, Gemini CLI can only read the files where you, like in the folder or project that you started in. So you can actually do dir add and then like ... like I can start going up and looking at I have the ADK docs here. That's like a cloned repo on my machine. I can actually just go ahead and add this. And now if I reference like at ADK docs, it will actually be able to read files from that directory and project as well. So that's another command I use a lot as well, especially when you're trying to integrate, if you're working on like an SDK or working on code and you want to, again, stay up to date with the latest. You could just pull the ADK docs, their repository, and just start reading the docs in code form as well. Yeah.
Excellent. If so, I like one more question, and then I also wanted to call out something about you in particular. The next question is there a place for me to submit feature requests?
Yes. GitHub. GitHub.com/Google-Gemini/Gemini CLI. Feature requests, discussions. It's open source. So if you want to create an issue and then assign it to yourself to work on, by all means, there's lots of open source contributors helping.
Perfect. And then the final thing is, I can't carry you in my pocket with me everywhere I go, and you probably won't give me your phone number, so that way I can't just call you at midnight and be like, how do I do that one command again? So it seems that you have a course that you published, right? For building Gemini CLI, building with the Gemini CLI. Is that right? Do you want to give it a quick shout out?
Yeah, it actually just came out today, a Gemini CLI course with the folks over at Deep Learning. It's a free course, like just over an hour, and it will go from basically installing Gemini CLI to jumping into some fun use cases like creating content like for social media from Gemini CLI, as well as like planning a conference and a bunch of whole things, software development, like how to study with Gemini CLI, how to create content, make dashboards. Like there are a ton of different use cases we dive into. And that just came out today. So yeah, it's free.
That's great. I should have used this. I created a skill for creating the metadata for our live streams after the fact. So it goes out and pulls down the transcript, which will become available in 1 or 2 days. And then it goes through and creates the description, the hashtags, and all of that. But it sounds like there is much more than you can do. So I'll definitely watch that.
Yes.
And then one last, I swear, final question, and then we're all going to run to this meeting that we've all decided to skip in favor of this live stream. Is the /dir add more like a YOLO command, or are there custom security rails you can implement, i.e. like a git ignore for secrets? So how do I stop sharing my secrets with Gemini?
Yeah, that is, it's such good naming. It's .GeminiIgnore. .GeminiIgnore files.
Is that in the root directory of where you're working, or is that in the dir directory of where you're adding?
So that would be similar to like a .getignore. So whatever file, whatever folder it's in, it will like reference that folder and any subfolders. So if you have it at your project level, any subfolders where matching those matchers or files will be ignored, so that if you tried to, and we have some of these by default, but if like I tried to then say read this file, it will show you an error and being basically say, because of ignore rules, I can't read this.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
we've got two more questions coming in. No, let's one more. Let's make this the final one.
The final one.
The final.
What is the best way to make the AI agent isolated into the project? For example, you created a web app and you plan to create a mobile app. What's the structure of your repo in that? Will you monorepo?
So I think there's kind of two questions here. One is like more of the structure of the project, which I think is totally dependent on what kind of application you're building. The second is like, how do you make Gemini CLI aware of the project? And the second one is like, so this .gemini.md file that we have in this project was fully generated by Gemini CLI. So we have a command .init that basically, if you're ever starting Gemini CLI in a fresh project that you have never used it in before, run this command. It will create that Gemini.md file with the best practices, with, okay, here's the technology being used. So if it was, a web application, it will say, okay, here, we're going to go through and we can check that out. So like it kind of gives the project overview, a quick description, the architecture of where certain files are. And that way, again, your context when you're starting up Gemini CLI, it already knows all this. So it's not having to go try different things, read different files, and like discover that every single session. So it's a really valuable command to like start, and you can run the command. Like if you were adding the mobile app, you could do the same thing. Yeah.
So it would create that at the top level, right?
Yeah, it would create at the project level.
So if I wanted to have specific ones, then I would probably go into the respective subdirectory if I had a monorepo, and for example, I would go into the folder that has my mobile app, create init over there, get my agent file, and then go up to the web folder, do that again. And then if I ever have something where I want to do a cross-platform refactoring, for example, I would go to the top level and say, OK, we want to do a refactoring. Let's rename our data model, and please ensure that this is done across all of the apps. That would probably work, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Gemini.mds are loaded from child folders. So if you had a mobile one that had specifics against the mobile app and a web folder, it would read both those in so that you could, if you did something on the web, you could say, hey, can I migrate that or do the same thing in the mobile version, and you would have that kind of context at the ready.
All right. Amazing. Well, Jack, thanks for your time and all those tips and tricks. I mean, like, I think both Noe and I got a lot out of this, and I hope our audience did as well. So thanks again for sharing your knowledge with us. And I am pretty sure we will want to have you back on sometime.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you both for having me. Lots of new things in the works. So I'm sure what you see this week might have a whole bunch of new things in a few months.
Yeah. OK, cool. And we'll post all the links to the stuff that we shared today in the description of the video and into the comments. If people have any questions, they can still post into the comments after the stream ends, and we'll have a look and make sure that we get those answered. Again, good place to ask for feature requests is the repository. We'll post a link to that as well. Yeah, anything else that we should mention before we go? No. All right. Amazing. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Great engagement on the stream. Great questions. And with that, I wish you a great rest of the day, wherever you are, from wherever you tuned in. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out when we go live the next time and when we post new videos. Try out the Gemini CLI. Go and check out the skills, build some yourself. And if you build something great, why don't you share it with us? All right. And we will see you in the next one.